Virginia's Teacher of the Year is from our corner of the Commonwealth. Anthony Swann, a fifth grade teacher in Franklin County, won the award in a virtual ceremony last night. 10 News reporter Taj Simmons stepped inside his classroom today to learn what sets him apart.
Any questions, comments? Anyone want to say anything?
Teacher Anthony Swann loves to motivate children at Rocky Mount Elementary School.
I don't just care for you in the classroom, I care for you outside as well.
More importantly, the kids in this classroom love Mr. Swann right back.
They find my room a safe haven and they have an open line of communication with me.
Swann is more than a special part of the school. He is now Virginia's Teacher of the Year.
Anthony Swann from Franklin County Public Schools. Congratulations, Mr. Swann.
Were you expecting it?
Never.
It's a miracle he became a teacher at all once you learn what happened in his childhood.
When I was in fourth grade, social services knocked on my classroom door to take me to a foster home.
He spent the rest of his youth in foster care, but his teacher's words that day inspired him to someday step in her shoes.
She grabbed me and she hugged me and she whispered in my ear, she said, "Anthony, everything is going to be all right." Math is very frustrating sometimes.
Life is better than ever for Swann, but he always teaches his fifth graders as if his younger self was sitting there with them.
I get on that level. I have never raised my voice at my children.
Swann's unique teaching voice stands out in Virginia, but he says the true honor is inspiring his children to succeed in life.
We often say Virginia is for lovers, or Virginia is for the influential as well, and that's through us teachers.
In Rocky Mount, Taj Simmons, 10 News working for you.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Gersh, president and founder of Gersh Literacy Associates. Thank you for joining us for Gersh Talks number 3. We're privileged and honored to be sitting here and talking with Mr. Anthony Swann, the 2021 Virginia Teacher of the Year. And from what I can see so far, a dedicated educator. It's no mistake that I reached out to Mr. Swann to have him sit with us this evening. I looked into his background and he has quite the interesting story that I think is probably going to be, or I'm confident will be, motivational for many. So Mrs. Swann, how are you?
I'm doing well this afternoon. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Happy holidays before I forget.
You as well.
I don't know what life is like down in Virginia, but right now we're dealing with the bomb cyclone. So
Wow.
everybody out, yes, so quick drop in temperatures and some brutal weather. So I hope everyone in our audience is staying warm and safe. For those of you joining us for the first time, Gersh Talks is a series where we sit down with consequential stakeholders to discuss anything ranging from pedagogical practices, policy initiatives, and really anything relevant to education and our young people. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Swann to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. My name is Anthony Swann. I am the 2021 Virginia State Teacher of the Year. I have been in education for 16 years now. I have always wanted to be a teacher since I was 11 years old and work in the profession. And I'm just glad that I was able to pursue it. It's been a dream of mine. I remember playing school, and then I was sharing a room with my brother, and he would be so upset because I would take up the entire room and I would steal my sister's baby dolls and stuffed animals and act like they're my students. And But to have my oldest brother call me not too long ago and say, you have always wanted to do what you're doing, and it's phenomenal to me. That meant a lot. I love serving children. I love serving teachers. I love representing this profession to the highest honor, and I'm glad to be on the show tonight.
Now, I gotta ask you, what 11-year-old? I mean, I suppose young people, they want to be astronauts, they want to be athletes. What 11-year-old says, I want to be a teacher, then they actually follow through with that?
This one, teaching, it saved my life. This profession literally saved my life. Many people, think of superheroes and those fictional characters. Well, teachers change lives and they save lives. And that was the case with me. And to know that I'm paying it forward, it just means so much. School is my safety place. It's my safety net. I can be dealing with something personally, and in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't wait to go to school. I just love school. I love children. I love serving teachers. This profession is just, it's one that tugs on my heart daily.
And I myself, I am a special education teacher at a high school in Brooklyn. I've been doing that for quite some time, and I often find that students who find school as a safety place, is there somewhere else that they're not getting that sense of safety? And so when you said school saved your life, I was wondering if maybe you would feel comfortable to expand on that a little bit.
Yes, sir. So I grew up without a father in my life, and my mom was addicted to alcohol and drugs. And this one particular, my mom she tried the best that she could, but she never could get it together. There were times where my siblings and myself, we were homeless. And this one particular time we were living with my grandmother, which was her mother. And I was in fourth grade, and one night around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, my mom came in and she was drunk. And so I got up and I peeked out of the room, and I saw my mom and her brother physically fighting. And I had to go to school the next day, but before I left the house, my grandmother said the most toxic thing that as I reflect, it was toxic. She said, "What goes on in this house stays in this house. Don't go to school running your mouth." And so I had to go to school with that trauma, knowing that I couldn't say anything. Well, while I was in school that day, social services knocked on my classroom door, and very unexpectedly, and they came to take me to emergency foster care. And my fourth grade teacher was trying to ask them questions like, "What is going on? Where are you taking him?" They would not tell her anything. So finally, she stopped talking to them, and she, first of all, I was so embarrassed because it was done in front of my entire class. And I remember having thoughts of like, what's wrong with me? How come my parents don't want me? I hate my life. I wish I was dead. And so in the hallway, my fourth grade teacher, she bent down and she whispered in my ear and she hugged me and she said, "Anthony, everything is going to be all right." And from there, I was placed in the system, and I stayed in the system until I aged out at age 21. But while I was in the system, I found myself developing this attitude of, I don't care because nobody cares for me. And so my grades were slipping. I was getting suspended off the school bus and from school, and I just did not care. Well, in around the 8th grade, my fourth grade teacher found me. She physically found me while I was still in foster care. And she had this conversation with me. And by that time, I had started playing school because I had just had this dream of just becoming a teacher. I wanted to give children what I never had, which was the love from an adult that was consistent in their life with no motives. And so when my teacher found me, she was like, "Anthony, I'm hearing that you're not doing well. I want you to take all your anger and all your bitterness and all of your frustration, and I want you to put it into making something of yourself. You don't have to be like your parents. What do you want to become?" And I said, "I wanted to be a teacher." And she looked at me and she was like, "For what? We do not make any money." But she retracted that statement and she said, "Anthony, if that's what you want to become, I'll stick with you." Well, by that time, I still had my guard up because every adult in my life ended up dropping me. But she planted a seed in me that day, and I started picking my grades back up. I started studying. I started putting all my frustration and anger into my books. At the end of 8th grade, I had the highest grade point average in the school. And so once I got to high school, I still had this dream of becoming a teacher. And so I kept my grades up. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned how to advocate for myself because I still didn't have parents and I was still in the foster care system. And so I learned how to check the scholarship drawer. And so I did that, and I put my own self through college with scholarships and loans. My senior year in college, my mom died very unexpectedly from a massive brain aneurysm. And I remember looking at my oldest sister and telling her that I quit. I was just traumatized all over again, and just felt like everyone I love leaves me or they drop me. And so my sister looked at me and she said, you can rest, but you're not going to quit.
Hmm.
I did not know that she would contact my 4th grade teacher.
Huh.
And so my 4th grade teacher calls me and she says, Anthony, what's going on? And so I was able to pour my heart out to her and just be vulnerable. And she allowed me to be vulnerable. And she said, Anthony, what do you need? And I said, her name is Miss Wilson. I said, Miss Wilson, this is my senior year of college. I'm supposed to start student teaching. I don't even have a car to get to where I'm supposed to be. Miss Wilson picked me up every single morning and took me to my student teaching placement before she had to be at school herself. Wow. And when I graduated, she reminded me that everything was going to be okay. And when I started my teaching career, I went back to the same elementary school I was taken away from. And I was teaching 3rd grade, and Miss Wilson was still teaching 4th grade. So when I say that this profession saved my life, had it not been for a teacher, I would not be the man I am or where I am today.
And so thank you for sharing your story. You did mention something about trauma a few times, and I think that's something that as teachers we always have to be aware of. But post COVID and post lockdown, it seems to really have come to the forefront. And in my school, and I'm here in New York City Public Schools, we took a course on trauma and how to make sure that we reflect an understanding of trauma, in our pedagogy. But separate from the course, how do you as a teacher, or how do you recommend, especially for newer teachers, not all students outwardly express themselves that they're hurt or dealing with trauma. So for that new teacher or any stakeholders, how do you go about identifying somebody who may be dealing with trauma and feeling the way you did and wanting to give up? And then maybe they have a sister that'll say, no, you're just taking a break.
That's a very good question. So it's a difference between being trauma informed and trauma responsive. And so a lot of times as teachers today, you may receive a course or something of being trauma informed, but then rolling it over to your classroom, you also have to be trauma responsive. And what I mean by that is this: you can have all the training in the world of trauma and what trauma is and how children deal with trauma, but unless you're responsive to the trauma, you are doing the children a disjustice. For instance, it boils down to the relationships with your children. You have to know your children. You have to know when something's off. You have to know when, little Johnny or little Susie, like something's not right today. So instead of me fussing at them, let me ask them the question, what's going on with you? What are you dealing with? What's underneath the surface? And you don't have to do that in front of everyone, but being responsive in that manner, it humanizes the children and it lets them know that I care for you as a human being and not just as my student. And so a lot of times in my classroom, what I've done is I had an open line of communication. I would always communicate with my children, and I would let them know when things were going on with me. I would communicate and say, boys and girls, this morning, Mr. Swann, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or boys and girls, Mr. Swann got a lot on his mind. I'm thinking about my mom that passed away. I would be vulnerable enough to share with them when I was dealing with things. And so it caused my children to be vulnerable enough with me to say, okay, you trust me, so let me trust you. And then there are times when I forgot to communicate. And I remember one time where I forgot to communicate that I had some stuff going on, and I was really snappy on my children. And one of my kids, he looked at me in front of the class and he was like, "What's wrong with you today? Why are you snapping on us?" And I, instead of me retaliating and say, "Who do you think you're talking to?" I was taken back and I had to reflect, and I said, "You know what? You are right. I forgot to communicate with y'all. Like, I got a lot going on. I'm thinking about a lot, and I apologize." So I apologized to the whole class, and my class was just looking like, "Thank you. We appreciate it," because we didn't know what was going on. But it let them see that, number one, I'm human. Number two, I make mistakes. Number three, I apologize to them. And a lot of them were looking at me like, "We never had a teacher to admit that they were wrong." And so when that happened, it calls for my children to be vulnerable with me when they have things going on. And they'll say, "Mr. Swann, I woke up this morning and me and my mom, we were arguing." And so it calls me as the teacher to say, in my mind, let me give them some space. Let me give them some time to process. And they're not being disrespectful when they say no. They're not being defiant. They just have some stuff going on. And so let me allow them to be human. And we can come back to the academics. The academics we'll get them there, but right now they need a humanistic moment. And so that would be my advice to the new teachers is don't just be trauma informed, be trauma responsive, and don't feel guilty in being trauma responsive, because as teachers, our mind is rolling like, we have this standard we got to teach. We got to meet this benchmark. We got state testing that's coming up. All of that is fine and dandy, but the children won't meet the benchmark unless they know that you care, because children don't perform for teachers that they don't have a connection with. And so that would be my advice, especially to those new teachers.
And so I certainly think that a big key to the social emotional learning component, which you spoke to earlier, of which the academics will later follow, is that human component. Showing them that just because you're up in front of the room doesn't mean that you still don't have your good days or bad days. So I just finished my doctoral program, and my research centered around culturally responsive pedagogy. So the first thing I want to say is, for those who are not familiar, it's not CRT, because I know there's a lot of debate
Thank
around
you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Around CRT, culturally responsive pedagogy, in short, is using students' prior experiences and cultural background to help as a vehicle for learning. But if I could just go back to that trauma piece for a moment, is there different ways to deal with trauma through the lens of being culturally responsive? And I don't know if that makes sense, but do you tailor your trauma responsiveness based on the particular child you may be interacting with at that moment?
I would say yes. Knowing the background of your children helps you to better serve them. Knowing whether, if in a particular culture, if in this culture, it's offensive to give hugs, you don't give that child a hug because that child will find it offensive. And so just knowing the backgrounds of your children, it will help you to be better culturally responsive when you are being trauma responsive as well. And how do you do that? Sometimes you have to ask your children questions. You have to ask them, things about their background, because that's how you get to know them, is by asking questions, asking them about their culture. And it helps you to be a better service.
It's really interesting because our peer mediation coordinator at my school, in the days leading up to the holiday break, which for some kids can be increased trauma because they're going to be at home. Not every kid looks forward to the break And you probably even have teachers that don't look as forward to the break. So when we were talking about mental health, and it fell in line with the curriculum because we've been talking about gun control and gun control policies, and there's a lot of trauma surrounding that. But I had a young lady, Middle Eastern background, and I said to her, one of the questions was, do you talk at home about mental health struggles? Is that something that's accepted in your culture? Because I had other students in the classroom from a Latin American background where they said that that sort of thing was pushed under the carpet in their homes and it wasn't really something that they talked about. And so I think the culturally responsive lens, along with trauma and being aware of your students, is really critical to being effective. And if you can nail that, then the academics, like you said, will follow.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Doing that too, it lets the children know that you respect me. Like, you're not crossing my boundaries. You respect my culture. You respect my background enough to not cross anything. Like, it just develops such a great rapport and great relationship with the children until once you get them, you got them. I remember having teaching one year, and I was teaching on the same teammate as another colleague, and she would not get the chance. She would not learn the children. She wouldn't talk to them. The children hated her.
Yeah.
And so I remember them coming to my room one day, and they were all upset with her, and they was like, we hate her. Oh, we can't wait until the state test. We're gonna fail on purpose to make her look bad. And I was like, y'all cannot do that. And they was like, watch. And then they said, Mr. Swann, we love you. You take the time to get to know us. You ask us questions. You ask us how our day is. You don't automatically write us up. We love you. So we're going to perform for you. But when we take this state test, we're going to fail on purpose. And that's what they did. That's what they like. Her passing rate was in the 40%.
Now, the thing is, did they understand that they're not necessarily punishing her as much as they're maybe punishing themselves and making themselves look bad?
Right. They and I tried to help them to understand that as well, but they wanted her to look bad so much until they didn't care. And I was like, oh my goodness, guys. But it taught me something as a teacher, that relationships are key to all components with children. You have to build those relationships. And I know, we say that, and it's in professional developments, and teachers hear this at the beginning of every school year, but it's a difference between hearing it and putting it into action.
Catchphrase versus action,
Yes.
Effective action in the classroom. That's certainly true. And as we were talking, I was thinking about an experience that I've shared a couple times with different people. So I was in a classroom teaching, and I had a young man that in September, every time he wanted to answer a question, he wouldn't just raise his hand and go, ooh, ooh. He would actually stand up to answer the question. And I said to myself, I didn't reprimand him. I let him do his thing. I later found out he was from an Egyptian background. Mm-hmm. So I spoke to a colleague of the same background. He said to me, in Egypt, the students stand when they answer the question, from a teacher. And so I told him, you can do that if you want. You don't have to. It's entirely up to you. But I let that be his decision. I didn't want to deride him and automatically say, no, sit down.
Right.
Because that's not a good way to build a rapport with a student. So, classic question, do you believe, enough of you, but just in general, do stakeholders believe in academics first? Do they believe in environment and behavior first? And I feel like that's probably been a question since the first teachers in the Stone Age, debating. And so it probably has to be a balance between the two. But I think probably from talking to you, you would agree that developing that classroom environment, showing them that you're a human being, you're still going to hold their feet to the fire and hold them accountable, but you're also going to be understanding.
Exactly. I actually serve as an assistant principal now.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Sure.
Being able to serve an entire building of K through 5 children, over 500 children, I still have to do the same thing. I still, even when children come to the office, instead of automatically saying you're going home, I have to literally do the same thing. Like, what is really going on with you? What's happening? Why are you acting like you're acting? And 9 times out of 10, the children tell me what's going on with them. They tell me what's underneath the surface because they're not comfortable telling everyone else. And then it's amazing to me because a lot of my children's trauma I've been through. And when they start talking, I just listen, and even down to the point where I've cried in front of some of them because it re-triggered my trauma. But then I was able to relate to them and say, listen, this is what happened to me. And then when I relate to them and tell them of my childhood trauma, they look at me like, I thought I was the only one. And it causes for them to have a sense of pride, knowing that, okay, I'm not alone. Okay, there's someone in this building that I know that gets me. So if I have problems, I can always ask to go talk. It's a cycle, even down to my teachers. I'm learning serving teachers is the same way as serving children. You have to get to know them, like when something's not right. For instance, I had one of my teachers to come in the building the other week, and I could tell that something wasn't right. And so it was before school. I followed her to her classroom and I said, what's wrong? And the teacher ended up opening up and telling me what was wrong. And at the end of the conversation, I was able to affirm the teacher and their feelings. And the teacher was just like, I'm just so glad you're in this building because we need you humanizing us as teachers too. And so it's a great cycle. I love doing what I'm doing.
And so for members of the Gershwitz Literacy Associates family who are in administrative roles, do you find that you have to walk a fine line between students being able to make a beeline to Mr. Swann because they're having a bad day versus maybe they should speak to the classroom teacher first? Because it seems to me like you're very enigmatic and very outgoing and the kids love you. Is there a procedure? Can they just go right to Mr. Swann because they're having a bad day? How do you balance the two so that the teacher's the leader in the classroom, but that you're also available to provide support?
That is such a great question. I actually had this to happen this week, where a student was having just a really rough day, and the teacher just felt like, I'm not getting through the student. The student is just not responding to me, so I'm going to send them to the office. So when I got the student to the office, the student told me what was going on, and I explained to the student, it's great that you can talk to me, but you also have to communicate with your teacher, because from your teacher's perspective, it just looks like you're being defiant, you're being disobedient. You need to be able to open up your mouth and say, no, this is what's going on with me. So I explained to them the importance of communicating with their teachers, just like they communicate with me. Even though they feel comfortable with me, I let them know I still push it back to the teacher. Like the same way you're talking to me, you have to be able to communicate what is going on with you to your teacher, so your teacher can be culturally responsive towards you. So your teacher can be respond to you in the correct way when it's dealing with your trauma. And this was a second grader I was talking to, and the second grader was like, you know what, you're right, Mr. Swann. Then there are some children who are just adamant of not talking to the teacher. And so when that happens, I always communicate with the teachers and let them know, listen, this is what's going on with this child. If the child's saying that they don't want to talk with you, please send them to the office. But I always let the teachers know what's underneath the surface, because I want them to be able to be trauma responsive rather than just saying this child is being defiant, this child is not listening to me, let me write them up. And so if the child is refusing to communicate, I'll communicate with the child. And what I'll do is to gain the trust and the respect of the child, I'll ask the student, do you mind if I share with your teachers? And they 9 times out of 10, they say, yeah, that's fine.
As a teacher myself in the classroom, I really appreciate that because, administrators have so much going on. And so administrators might be quick to sort of just triage and get the kid back into the swing of things. But the fact that you communicate both to the student and the teacher, it balances the dynamic of the two. And I know as a teacher in the classroom, I appreciate it because we have to be leaders in the classroom. And so that power dynamic, it's more of a reciprocal relationship, it sounds like. And so
Yes.
that's very good. So correct me if I'm wrong, are you also on the State Board of Education? Is that correct?
I'm no longer on the State Board of Education.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Like when we received a new governor, it was just a political move, but I did serve on the board for a year, and I've been the only sitting teacher that has ever served on the board in the history of Virginia.
So I'll try to behave myself and not put you on the spot too much. However, being you're not on the board anymore, maybe that gives you a little bit of leniency in some of the questions and responses. So first and foremost, why do you think you were either selected or invited to be on the board? Is it simply because of the Teacher of the Year award, or like I see in you, did they see something special and unique about your approach to education?
That's a great question. So when I was approached with being appointed on the board, I was shocked for number one, because they told me that I would be the only teacher that has ever served on the board before. Number two, I was able to talk with the Governor Northam, and he was just explaining to me, like, there needs to be a teacher on that board. Like, it needs to be, if we're making decisions about teaching and learning, what better stakeholder than to be on this board as a teacher.
That's right.
And so that was his stance. He wanted a teacher to be on there, to have a teacher voice. And I'm glad that I was able to serve on the board for a year, because I was able to, when things came across the desk, I was able to speak up and say, no, that's not what teachers are dealing with. No, that's not what's going on in the classrooms. And thankfully, there was a superintendent and another principal on the board as well. And so we would kind of feed off of each other and say, no, I don't think this policy is good because it's not keeping in consideration with our teachers in Virginia. Those different things. It was a great experience. I gained a lot of knowledge. It helped me with knowing that my voice carries weight. And so now when I need to speak up, I speak up.
And so while you had this position, were you also actively teaching in the classroom or in your administrative role?
I was actively teaching in the classroom.
So, that's so rich and valuable, because like you said, it'd be like talking about how best to do a medical procedure in an operating room, but you don't have any doctors sitting on the board. Oftentimes we get, at least here in New York State, but I'm sure it's uniform across the nation, these unfunded mandates where they just pass these things down to schools and they say, okay, here it is, now go do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have in your capacity, you were able to bring that human connection, some of that realisticness to the board. And so that's interesting. What would you say was your biggest achievement in the year that you spent on the board?
I would say challenging policymakers, and because
you can laugh and smile, it's okay.
Yeah, when they would present something to the board, for instance, when something came across the board, where literacy for only a certain sector of children, I raised my hand and I was like, is that equitable?
And what do you mean sector?
For instance, those children that can only afford to go to preschool, I raised my hand and I was like, no, that's not equitable. Like, make it make sense. If this is public education, why is this only going to be available for this certain amount of children? No, that's not right. Public
in
education,
some ways, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but in some ways was so far removed, and yet it was almost like it was only yesterday, Brown v. Board, where we were supposed to have equity in schools. And the reason why I honed in on when you said that certain segment is, again, if I can refer back to my research, it was underserved minorities in an urban in an urban setting. And I'm not quite sure what the demographic is of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but regardless, equity, I think that's, definitely super important. And, if you want to speak more to that piece, please.
Yes, sir. So, we make these policies, or the policy hold makers make all of these policies, but they don't consider everyone. They just consider a certain sector of children or a certain sector of parents. And it's not right. Like, if we are going to have free and public education, it's supposed to be for everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their social economics status. It's supposed to be for everyone. And so I remember challenging one of the presenters, and after the meeting, the presenter came to me, and she was actually grateful. She was like, I've never had anyone to challenge me, but you caused me to think. You caused me to think about this. Like, I've never had anyone to challenge me from your perspective. You're in the classroom, you're in the trenches. So I appreciate you raising your hand. I remember her telling me that, and it made me feel good, because it let me know that I am on this board for a reason, and it's to speak up for teachers and children.
And I'm the first one to say I don't like the politics of schooling, or the backroom deals, or the inside baseball. And I love teaching. I tell my kids, I love you all, but sometimes you like human, you drive me crazy sometimes, but I still love you. And so in terms of that voice, I think it's a fresh thing from the classroom that you're not a politician, you have a background in teaching, you have a unique story. And so to be able to bring that voice, and, I don't know if anybody ever took it as confrontational or aggressive, but I think sometimes that's what you have to do,
Right.
To be the voice for those who are sometimes the voiceless. But I guess it was a tricky balance, even for just the year that you served.
Yes, sir. No one ever took it as controversial, or because I'm also wise in how I present myself and how I say things. But I'm also, I will speak up to the point where it will cause people to cock their head, or cause them to really think about the things that they're saying or doing, because no one has ever challenged them or ever presented another perspective, because we're just so used to making these policies until we don't think about the people in the trenches.
And so, as a side note, because I have a long commute from my home to the school I teach in. When we spoke prior to this, I was actually sitting in traffic, and I don't know if you picked up in my voice, but I was a little anxious, I was a little energetic, maybe even high strung. And then I heard your voice, and it was like woosah. You had like this calm way about you, and so I can see how that would translate into the classroom, and in dealing with the teachers, and being that shoulder that they can lean on and talk to. Are you always this calm?
I try to stay this calm. And the reason being, and I will give credit to where credit is due. When I became an administrator, I learned quickly from my head principal. Like, she's taught me how to keep a level head, because if everyone is panicky, then who's going to lead? And so I've learned to, one of my greatest things is just humanizing teachers. And so when teachers are dealing with things and they come to me, I listen before I even, I don't judge. I tell my teachers, thank you for coming. I walk around the building every morning before the bell rings, and I say, I appreciate you for showing back up, because this is a hard profession. Some days you don't feel like getting up, but you do. And I tell them thank you. And one day my principal was like, why do you keep saying that? And I explained to her, like, this is a hard profession. Like, these teachers, I know teachers who literally walked out and said, I quit, turned in their keys, turned in their license to the principal one day, and never came back. I know teachers who did that. And so for our teachers to show up daily, yes, I want them to know that they're appreciated.
And so that's my next question was going to be about visibility, because it's easy to speak the words, but we spoke a little bit about we're always saying trauma. It's one thing to be trauma informed, but it's another to be trauma responsive in that line of communication. So my question was going to be, how much time do you spend in your office versus out in the hallway? And the fact that you're seeing at least every morning, that consistency, not only the students need that, but like you said, the teachers need that. And, if the teachers are feeling that you'll be a cheerleader just as much as you'll provide them constructive feedback, I think they're likely to be more receptive and show up and wanting to try new things and be energetic.
They are. Like, I hate being in my office. And if I'm in my office too long, I will get up and go in classrooms like every single day. I'll go to teachers and say, okay, go take a break. And I'll hear some teachers to say, no, Mr. Swann, I'm fine. And I'll say, no, I'm insisting.
Yeah.
Bye. I got your children.
Yeah.
And it lets them know, like, wow, like, you care enough about me as a human. And, even with, I'm learning a lot from my head principal. Like, we're both, our energy is the same. She's the same as me. She tells the teachers, if you are at a point where you're frustrated and you need a tap out, let us know. We'll come in, we'll cover your class. You can go use the restroom when you need to go. You don't have to hold it all day. If your children are getting on your nerves and you're just mentally exhausted, let us know. Get a tap out. Like, we love being there. I love walking the building every morning before the kids come in. I had one teacher, she said, I've been teaching 30 years and I have never had a principal to tell me good morning every single morning. She said, you don't know what that means to me. And so hearing those words, it lets me know that I'm serving correctly, because I don't want to be the type of administrator that just sits in my office. I want my teachers to know I'm in the trenches with you. What you need? What do you need?
And so one point I would like to make is, how did the kids interpret it? Oh, Mr. Swann, the assistant principal's here. Our teacher's leaving. Did the kids see it in the positive light that you see it, that you're giving the teacher a bathroom break or a brief tap out? How did the kids respond to that?
That is a great question. So our children, the way that my head principal and myself, we lead the building, is we tell the children, even like if they come to the office because they're exhausted or their teacher has gotten on their nerves, we tell our children, before you disrespect, raise your hand and ask, can I go to the office to take a break? And so when the teachers do the same thing, it doesn't cause the children to ask. They say, oh, they're taking a break. Okay, we understand. Because they're able to do the same exact thing.
So this is part of the building culture,
yes, sir,
that you have developed. And so that trauma responsiveness is not just specific students of classroom, it's building wide.
Yes, sir.
That's excellent. And I've worked with a lot of different administrators, and I the word work, I will sometimes catch myself saying to my wife, oh, I'm on my way to work, or I just got to work, but I quickly correct myself because I'm at a point in my educational life that I don't see it as work. I correct myself and saying I'm at school.
Yes.
And I know as an administrator, it's hard to avoid looking at the data and looking at the attendance numbers and all that, quantitative information. But the fact that you're taking the time to make that human connection and look at the qualitative, that's super important. Putting a face and a story to the numbers. If you just look at the numbers, you're only getting one part of the story. Okay, right. So and so. And by the way, I'm not going to say Johnny, because for 19 years I've been hearing about this Johnny Smith kid. I don't even actually think I've ever had a Johnny Smith on my roster, but he must be quite the individual, because I've heard him talked about for years and years. Yeah. But that quantitative, being able to put a voice and a face to a 70% on a test. Okay, but what was going on with that particular student based on the circumstances? Now, some kids just don't study, and some right. kids, I don't do math. I just finished my doctoral program. I still can't do math. Some kids just won't get it, and that's okay. Right. But putting a face to the numbers and looking at the story, that's really important. And so it's Christmas Eve, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but let's get to some different stuff. What do you like to do for fun? Any secret talents you might have?
I love to sing. I also love to travel. I love to sing, and I've sang to my teachers, and I've sang in a talent show at school before,
Hmm.
and then I also love to travel.
Now you don't need my permission if you want to belt out a few lines of your favorite song, but I won't put you on the spot.
You just put me on the spot.
I apologize. It's okay. We won't next time, because I hope you'll join us again and we can continue this conversation. Travel. Where most unique place you've traveled, the place you enjoyed the most?
Well, being a state teacher of the year, you travel the entire country. I would have to say Seattle, Washington recently. I had to do a conference out there with some other state teachers of the year. I loved that scenery. It was beautiful.
Eclectic, yeah.
Yes. Let's see.
And so, by the way, a year or two removed from your distinguished honor, which will last a lifetime, you're still serving in that capacity, going to conferences, doing keynotes, and
Yes, sir. So once you become a state teacher of the year, you're always a state teacher of the year.
of course,
It's like a presidency, and
yes.
it's a lifetime thing. So whenever they
Minus
ask,
all the drama and voting ballots, and that's a
yes.
whole nother conversation. But yes, please continue.
So whenever they ask you to come or invite you to different things on the national level, you're able to do it. A
Wow.
lot of people, they ask the question like, how are you affording all this? So when you become a state teacher of the year, they pay for your travel. You just literally just show up.
Did you tell your fourth grade teacher this? Because she said teachers don't make that much money. And
I did, and she's like she's been with me to a couple of things as well, and she's been able to travel with me
Wow.
as I present it. And of course, when she walks out, the whole room is kind of a wreck, and they're crying, and because my message and my platform is the power of a teacher, and I remind teachers of how powerful they are without them even knowing, because Ms. Wilson never knew her power until I came back and told her my story. And it was very interesting because when I won this award, I was able to go and do a story on her. I surprised her with the news anchor, and she shared in that story how she had searched for me for 4 or 5 years, and I never knew. And so it's very interesting. I'm humbled. I do not flaunt my title because I want people to know me for me. And when it's time for me to represent teachers on the whole, I do that.
Does the public think that teachers are remarkable?
It is. Teachers do not realize it's a thankless profession, and we don't receive the professional salary that we're worth. God knows we don't. And so for children to come back and say, thank you, you saved my life, that, is fuel for motivation right there.
During COVID, something I heard sometimes was, oh, teachers just want to stay home in their pajamas and teach. And I mean, I was home on virtual learning, and there was sometimes I was in pajamas, but I think I worked harder during COVID than probably in the classroom. And so I'm not going to say the entire public, but I oftentimes wonder how much of the public perception says teachers are remarkable. Teachers are out there doing, and a good teacher doesn't need the public to pat them on the back, but at the same time, it would be nice for the public to realize what it's like, in the trenches every day and trying to, save these kids.
I agree with you. There are times when I've had parents to say, I couldn't be no teacher. Y'all, my hat's off to y'all because I couldn't deal with all these children all day. Like my oldest brother even says it. He's like, how do you do it? Like, you just deal with children all day long. And you have to have a passion, because if you're in it for the money, you're in it for the wrong thing. And so not all teachers was okay when COVID hit. I was one of those teachers who actually cried because we sent our children home for 2 weeks and then we never came back. And I cried because I'm thinking about the child that was hungry, the child that was traumatized at home, and now they have to stay at home. Like, I thought about all those things. Like, it was not okay for every teacher. Some of us struggled because we wanted to be at school.
It's, you talk about COVID, and here in New York City, as many places, if not all in the nation, this whole COVID thing caught us off guard. All of a sudden, having to make sure that these kids have devices, and not only devices, but that they have the internet connection. But you talk about the food, that was one of the biggest reasons why lockdowns were delayed in New York City, was because breakfast and lunch are sometimes the only two meals that these kids get from the school. And so figuring out how we were going to provide, not me personally, but as a school system, not just the academics, but the social emotional support. And I'll say my school got to be very creative. We held clubs on Fridays and during the weekdays, but we did it online and virtually. And for the teachers, we had virtual happy hours where we can just, chat and get rid of some of that stress. It was a big learning curve. But when you talk about the, how emotional you're dealing with your own trauma, but now you're worrying about we worry about the kids on a regular basis. Now you're talking about some of these kids are in homes where trauma is a 24/7 thing, and they're being exposed to it, and they don't have that face-to-face connection. And I'm not going to lie, because I have a long commute. I love what I do, but I do travel 2 hours each way, and I do it because I love the kids. So when I heard schools were closed, initially I said, all right, I get to work from home. My only commute is passing through the living room to the office. But then I realized, after a while, what it means really for these kids. And I thought back to myself when I was in high school. If we closed down while I was in high school, I would have had a lot of trauma myself, because I really depended on those teacher relationships. So, as we wind down here, so you like to sing, you like to travel. Anything else we should know about Mr. Swann besides the incredible educator he is?
Just serving children is my life. Like, I was being vulnerable and transparent even now, like during the holidays. My trauma is triggered because I don't have parents. And I found myself even on yesterday saying, I wish that I was at school. Like, and I said that because school is a safe place for me. When I'm at school, I can pour everything into my children. I can pour everything into my teachers. And it's like, I don't have to worry about the world. I don't have to worry about outside things. Like, I can just focus on education and serving kids and teachers. Like, and so that is just like my passion. And I don't know what I would do if I couldn't do it. Like, I really don't.
And so if people want to find out more about your passion and about who you are, your Twitter handle, if you want to share, or any other platform people can reach out.
Yes, sir. My Twitter handle is at 2021 VATOTY. And it's the same thing for Instagram.
Very good. And so I'm Dr. Gershwitz, president and founder of Gershwitz Literacy Associates. This was Gersh Talks number 3. And like I said, we're honored and it was a pleasure. I was surprised how quickly you responded, but it clearly you're humble and down to earth. And so that's really appreciated. Anybody who wants to find out more about what we do and how we try to impact students and stakeholders, you can visit our website. You can reach out to us, 631-803-2752. And, we're all about holistic approach to education. We want to continue this conversation, not only with you, but with other, consequential stakeholders. And it's important to keep that conversation going. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, especially so close to the holidays. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you.